Classic Sonic games from the Genesis were the ones that welcomed Sega's mascot to the video games world. From 1991, Sonic was defined by his speed, surpassing the levels in the shortest possible time, and, if you're as fussy as I am, collecting all the Chaos Emeralds to get the good ending of the game. But sometimes there's more to these games than just playing and completing the levels. These games had a cool story behind them that not many people know. Stories that were left in the manuals for the most dedicated fans who really wanted to know more about the game they were playing. Something similar that many players overlook when playing these games is the level design. Probably in the first games, the levels and the backgrounds weren't as deep as they will become in later entries, but the 16-bit console could still give us some pretty cool views that, even if you don't fully agree with, are part of the history of these games and part of the storytelling that helps develop the plot. So this time, we're going to talk about these beautiful levels from the classic games and their importance to the game's plot. So without further ado, let's start with the video. Green Hill Zone is probably the most iconic level in the entire Sonic the Hedgehog series. I mean, it was recreated dozens of times, but at its first appearance, the level stood out for its emblematic loopings, the moving platforms, the sunflowers and palm trees, the square texture of the ground, the breakable walls, and its iconic music. The background of this level doesn't show much more than the opening of such a great franchise. The waterfalls on the moving clouds, the mountains behind, and the great ocean make you feel that your adventure across South Island will be as colorful and amazing as the protagonist of this game. According to the Japanese manual, Green Hill is described as a field blessed with linear water. Features include loop slopes, crumbling cliffs, and S-shaped tunnels. Let's run through with good speed and timing. Definitely, Green Hill is a level created to be an example of what Sonic is about, because all the parts of this level were designed to show how fast Sonic can be. As Yuji Naka said, this is a stage that took the designers the longest to get properly arranged, and from the beginning of development, the graphics were probably redone 4 or 5 times. The art and math for this zone alone took half a year to produce. At the time, we were aware of computer graphics, but we tried to get that look by hand. But something I'm missing is that Green Hill looked different in the beta of Sonic 1. In fact, it was pretty different. The mountains and the clouds had a different pixel art that wouldn't be recreated until Sonic Mania arrived, recreating these backgrounds with great fidelity. Even the beta had a sign with "Welcome" written on it. Sadly, this beta version of Green Hill is lost, but the final version would become the definitive version of Green Hill that we know, and honestly, I'm happy with it. Once you get through this zone, the next one is a 180-degree change compared to Green Hill. Although it's still one of my favorites, especially for the music, you can't deny that it changed the game's vibe a lot once you get there. I'm talking about Marble Zone. Starting this zone with those statues staring at you with the mirror face on them, well, not really. Actually, they are the lions, but I've always seen the mirror face on them. This zone marks a big difference from Green Hill because we must be careful with our movement due to the lava that characterizes the entire level. The background outside this time makes you feel that you're in a different place. The sky is still blue, though this time it's not a clear sky. It looks like a mist that embraces the whole zone, probably due to the lava. You can also see some of the structures of this place behind the forest that encircles the zone. The mountains are similar to the mountains of the Vita version of Green Hill, this time colored purple. And a trivia note that not many people know is that originally Marble Zone would have had UFOs in the sky. Another decision that I'm honestly glad they removed it, because it doesn't match with the level's vibe in my opinion. But the level also has another section that hits a completely different vibe compared to the outside. The inside of Marble looks like an old structure, a dungeon that was probably created by a tribe. The underground is marked by its lava rivers and a lot of different traps that will try to make you lose. The background this time is marked by cells and pillars that certainly make you feel that you're crossing through an old lost dungeon. Some abstract paintings are also visible, but honestly I didn't find a way to interpret them, so if anybody in the comments can figure out what they are, I'd be grateful. According to the manual, Marble Zone is described as traverse the underground path to the underground temple with swirling lava. The temple is teeming with traps. Watch out for chain ceilings with sharp needles, up and down hammers, and the piles of needles that pop out. Another trivia is that originally Labyrinth Zone was going to be the second zone of this game, but the developers decided to put it as the fourth zone to let the player take a breath before reaching a level of difficulty like that. Thank God they decided to put the Labyrinth later in the game. Early in production, Labyrinth was going to be the second stage, but Labyrinth is much harder than the early stages, and it would have been a sudden spike in difficulty. Sonic is really different sort of action game compared to anything that had been made at that time, so we really wonder if it was okay to have him running through every stage so quickly. So we wanted there to be a moment for the player to catch his breath. Spring Your Zone is the first pinball style zone that we had, and with it, the high speed levels with a lot of momentum come back, characterized by swampers everywhere and a bunch of spiky enemies. The background of this zone doesn't change much compared to the previous ones, with the difference that instead of a big river or forest, now what we see first in the background are buildings, and instead of the blue sky that we've seen in the previous zones, this time it's a purple sunset with mountains that are pretty similar to the Vita version of Green Hill with a different color palette. A city at sunset lined with exotic buildings. Jumping from the platforms onto movings, Sonic can fly like a pinball. If you accelerate, you can run even in very steep areas. But it wasn't the original idea for this zone. In the prototype version of Sonic 1, the zone is called Sparkling Zone. zone, and it feels more like a casino than it ended up being, with the buildings just behind us with signs that have different message. Honestly, both options were good decisions. Probably the Vita version is a more accurate version of what a casino should be, but the final version with the cop signs and the less saturated background is still my favorite. Such a good decision for such a good zone. This map was the first one to be drawn and finalized. Wanting to bounce around the pinball like bumpers in this stage really can't be helped, because the star-potted bumpers make a boobing sound when you bounce on them. In Sonic themed lexicon, we call them boobings. Before we continue, I'd be grateful if you subscribe and like the video, because less than 5% of the people that watch my videos are subscribed. Without more words, let's continue. Labyrinth Zone is the one that changes the vibe of the previous zones, because instead of seeing at least a sky above us that gives the impression of feeling free as we cross these new zones, Labyrinth is completely enclosed, and all we can see are the mirrors with some symbols, the crystals, the abandoned traps with some vines, and obviously, the water. And as its name says, we are now in a big maze full of water that we have to cross to finally find the exit. The waterfalls are one of the most iconic things that this level has. And obviously, the presence of the weather, the different underwater paths to explore, and the tons of mechanisms that open the different ways to exit this labyrinth give us the sensation that this place was designed to be a dungeon that should contain something really important, given the level of trust that it has. Something that will be developed deeper in the different titles and appearance of this level, especially the movie where it's the place the Master Emerald rests. Due to the development team thinking the hedgehogs weren't capable of swimming due to their chubby bodies, Sonic can't swim, and he must breathe air from the bubbles. As for the air bubble idea, we were thinking of ways to make the character more unique. So we thought giving him some sort of weakness would be a good idea, and since there was a water stage, why not have him sink? So what to do when he gets in the water stage, we wondered, and after some deliberation we came out with the air bubbles. The prototype version of Labyrinth is really different compared to the final version, because instead of the mirrors with symbols that all we us know, it looks like more a cavern with some light sources coming from the exterior. The manual describes this zone as, if you don't pass through the water, you won't be able to get through this maze. However, Sonic can swim. Let's proceed and take a breath from a big bubble. A countdown will begin when you are almost out of breath. Starlight Zone is my favorite Sonic 1 zone. And how would it be? A story night with one of the best soundtracks in a classic Sonic game welcomed us. Despite the type of enemies that the zone has, it's a peaceful place that, according to the comics, is supposed to be an unfinished highway. That might explain the urban style of the level and the vibes of being a building in progress. The loops come back this time, and in my opinion this level is probably the one where the loops stand out due to the high speed that we reach through the ramps. The manual describes this zone as, Sonic runs against a backdrop and a view of a glittering starry night sky. Being pushed back by the wind generated by electric fence, using seesaws well to execute jumps, he'll be kept very busy. And by Naoto Oshima himself, while designing the stages, I had the image in my mind of something like outer space, or a starry night sky. I was thinking there should be a place where you run through a scenic nighttime location. By the time we were done with these last two stages, Labyrinth, Starlight, and Stratbrain, we had a really good understanding of the system, and had become somewhat fanatical about the elaborate moving platforms. Something that is mostly a headcanon of mine is that you can notice that while you are getting through the levels and advancing to the next zone, the levels start to become more mechanized than before, starting with Springyard, being the first level that is not a recurrent place that you could find on an island. I know that Labyrinth is not mechanized, and that's the one zone that breaks my headcanon a bit, but it's something that I wanted to share with all of you. Scrapbrain Zone is the first zone in the entire series that completely changes the design of the zone depending on which actor you're playing. The manual describes it as, we have passed through to the polluted city and finally arrived at the Dr. Eggman's secret base. Gears, saws, and automatic hammers are on the attack. There are also submerged caverns beneath the base. The first act is a welcome to Eggman's basement, a place that looks like an industry with a lot of traps that will try to catch you. The entire level feels like a big trap, flame vents that can catch you by surprise, platforms that appear and disappear constantly, and switches that will be your best friends to find a way to escape this mechanized city. The towers in the background also expel smoke into the sky. I'm pretty sure Eggman doesn't give a damn about biological contamination. Once you get to the end of the stage, you enter the next part of the basement. The Act 2 starts with Sonic finally entering Robotnik's fortress. It looks like a complex bunker with a lot of robot stuff. The background this time is a bunch of panels and pipes. A lot of saws, spikes, and electrical orbs will try to catch you everywhere. You must be careful with how you move, because there are also parts in the level where you'll fall into the void if you aren't alert. Once you end the act, this level marks a different from the previous ones. It doesn't end. The camera moves to the right, the music suddenly changes, and we see Eggman happily laughing as he jumps on the button that makes the floor drop, sending Sonic falling into the next act. Act 3, as Yuji Naka describes it, instead of going straight to the boss in the end, you get dropped down a level, and we wanted that feeling of fighting your way to back up. It would be nice to draw a specific background just for the final stage, but due to the space and time we just changed the background color and made the basement level the same as Labyrinth Zone. This act is essentially a fourth act of the Labyrinth Zone. It follows the same structure as the zone previously mentioned, a water maze with traps that you must avoid, but instead of fighting Eggman in this level, you must get out of this underwater maze to finally reach the final battle. The prototype version of Scrap Brain was called Clockwork Zone, but since there's not much to explore in this prototype version because the level wasn't finished, even the background is just the same as the main art of Act 2, so there's not much to say about it. A fun fact is that in the prototype, when you select this level, the title card misses the W of work when the name appears, so technically this level is called Clockwork Zone. Hey, Final Zone looks practically the same as the Act 2 of Scrap Brain. There's not much to say about it besides Eggman being defeated and falling into his home machine. At the end, Sonic returns to Green Hill, and if you got the 6 Chaos Emeralds, new flowers and animals will appear after they are dropped by Sonic. And a cool detail that I love they had added to this version, but was just part of the 8-bit version of Sonic 1, is that once Sonic drops the emeralds, all the mechanized parts of the island disappear. It's a cool detail, if you ask me. Talking about the emeralds, something that I didn't mention earlier is the special stages. Accessible once you get the 50 rings and pass through the big ring after the sign post, except in Scrap Brain where it's impossible to get the big ring. This is due to the VRAM console limitation that is used to animate the background of the level. The special levels are characterized by their notion form. The backgrounds constantly change between birds and fishes, the stage rotates, and the player must avoid touching the gold circles. Yeah, I fell into this trap when I was a kid. The levels have different types of objects that will change the area many times. The blocks that make up the layout of the act, the gold circle that will expel Sonic from the level if it touches it, the diamond that usually covers the emerald that is destroyed by Sonic if he touches it with his spin attack, bumpers that will make the task harder, this thing called the jump stand that usually acts as the same as the block, but sometimes there are transparent versions of it that become solid once you pass through them, the up circle that increases the speed of a stage, the down circle that decreases the speed of a stage, and finally the reverse circle that changes the direction of the rotation. This stage has 6 different acts, and once you get the 6 Chaos Emeralds, no others will appear. All the zones of Sonic 1 are iconic. You can't deny that the game has a lot of beautiful details that make everything feel even more vivid than in other games. But this is not the end, because the game that follows up has even more details than the first one. So if you're interested, I'll see you in the next video. Let's go!